Judge Arthur Coleman watched with contempt as Olivia Prescott stood before his court in a simple beige sweater. "Are you actually prepared to handle this case?" he mocked. But when she began speaking, quoting precedents only seasoned lawyers would know, his smug smile vanished. This seemingly ordinary woman was about to teach him a lesson he'd never forget. At 38, Olivia Prescott was one of Boston's most formidable civil rights attorneys. Today, she deliberately transformed herself, pulling her styled hair into a bun, removing her signature pearls, and trading her tailored suit for modest clothing. "This has to work," she whispered to her reflection. She had researched Judge Coleman thoroughly. For 15 years, he'd presided with notorious bias, favoring corporations over individuals, especially when cases were argued by female attorneys. Olivia had been approached by representatives from Riverside Gardens, a retirement community housing lower-income seniors. Westlake Development planned to build luxury condominiums, forcing out dozens of elderly residents. The case had already been before Coleman once, with a high-profile attorney who'd been practically laughed out of court. "If he sees another polished Harvard attorney, his mind will be made up before I speak," she explained to her colleague Marcus. "So your plan is to pretend to be inexperienced? That's risky." "I'm not going to lie, I'm just not going to correct assumptions." Her strategy wasn't about winning outright, but getting Coleman to underestimate her. Then when the time was right, she would reveal her true capabilities. At the courthouse, Olivia blended into the crowd. Inside, she spotted the opposition. Three Westlake attorneys led by Richard Daniels. "Are you the paralegal?" he asked dismissively. "I'm representing Riverside Gardens today," she replied simply. Gloria Winters, a 78-year-old resident, squeezed Olivia's shoulder. "Thank you for taking this on. We couldn't afford another big-name lawyer." Olivia smiled. "Sometimes the unexpected approach works best." Judge Coleman entered, his tall frame and silver hair giving him a commanding presence. "I see we have new counsel for the plaintiffs," he remarked with undisguised skepticism. "Let's hope we don't waste the court's time today." Richard Daniels presented his case with polish. "Westlake Development has followed every regulation. The zoning change was approved. The property's current use is simply no longer economically viable." Judge Coleman nodded appreciatively. "Thank you, Mr. Daniels. Clear and concise as always." He turned to Olivia with impatience. "Ms. Prescott, your response." Olivia stood, deliberately fumbling with her notes. "Your Honor, Riverside Gardens has been home to over 60 senior citizens for more than 20 years." "Ms. Prescott," Coleman interrupted, "I need legal arguments, not emotional appeals." "Of course, Your Honor. I apologize," she said, appearing flustered. "The residents contest the validity of the zoning change on the grounds that proper notification procedures weren't followed." Coleman sighed. "And your evidence?" "We have affidavits from residents stating they never received the legally required notices." "Affidavits can be prepared by anyone. Do you have anything substantive?" Daniels interjected. "Your Honor, we have signed receipts showing all notifications were delivered as required." Coleman nodded. "Indeed, this seems like a straightforward matter of documentation, which your clients lack." Olivia mentioned the historical significance of the property, which triggered Coleman's condescension. "Miss Prescott, is this your first major case?" The courtroom fell silent. "I've handled various matters, Your Honor," she answered truthfully, if incompletely. "Let me explain something," Coleman said with evident condescension. "Passion doesn't count for anything in court. Evidence does. Precedent does. And so far, you've presented me with neither." "Your Honor," Olivia began softly, "may I have a moment to confer with my clients?" Coleman waved dismissively. "Then I'm making my ruling." "Don't worry," Olivia whispered to the seniors. "This is proceeding exactly as expected." When she turned back, Olivia allowed a subtle shift in her posture. "Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence regarding the property's classification under municipal code." Coleman frowned. "The defendant has already addressed the zoning issues." "Not zoning, Your Honor. Historical preservation eligibility under the Williams precedent." A flicker of confusion crossed Coleman's face. "Williams? Williams versus Northwestern Development, 2008. The Third Circuit established that buildings housing predominantly elderly populations for over 20 years qualify for expedited historical review, even without prior designation." Coleman's eyes narrowed. That case isn't relevant here. If I may explain the relevance, Your Honor. Coleman studied her, curiosity replacing some of his dismissiveness. Proceed, but be quick. For the next 30 minutes, Olivia methodically presented arguments, each revealing deeper knowledge of precedent and statute than the last. She cited cases that even Coleman had to strain to recall, referenced local ordinances with specific subsection numbers from memory, all while appearing simply well-prepared rather than expertly strategic. Coleman called both attorneys to his chambers. "Mr. Daniels, were you aware of these precedents?" Coleman asked. Daniels cleared his throat. "We considered these cases distinguishable from the current situation." Distinguished how? Ms. Prescott's analysis seems quite thorough. Ms. Prescott is overlooking key differences in property valuation and municipal interests. "I'm not overlooking them," Olivia interjected calmly. "I've addressed them in Section 3 of my brief. The Harvard Law Review article by Professor Abernathy specifically refutes the valuation argument." Coleman raised an eyebrow. "Harvard Law Review. You're familiar with Abernathy's work?" "Yes, Your Honor." Coleman studied her with increasing curiosity. "Miss Prescott, where did you study law?" Olivia met his gaze directly. "Harvard, Your Honor. Class of 2008. Any cases I might recognize?" Olivia allowed herself a small smile. "Perhaps Prescott versus Department of Housing and Urban Development." The change in Coleman's expression was unmistakable. That case had gone to the Supreme Court 2 years ago and established new precedent for fair housing enforcement nationwide. "You're that Olivia Prescott?" he asked, disbelief coloring his voice. "Yes, Your Honor." When court resumed, Coleman's demeanor toward Olivia had transformed from dismissive to respectful. He no longer interrupted her, instead listening intently. Olivia introduced a community charter from 1972 that included a covenant protecting residents from displacement for commercial development. When Daniels claimed they hadn't received this document during discovery, Olivia calmly directed him to the exact page in their previous submission where it appeared. "Ms. Prescott," Coleman said, "you've presented a remarkably thorough case today. One might wonder why such understated presentation initially." Olivia met his gaze directly. "Your Honor, I found that in life, as in law, people often see what they expect to see. These residents are dismissed because they're elderly, on fixed incomes. Their legal rights remain regardless of appearances." A murmur ran through the courtroom. "Sometimes," Olivia continued, "the only way to demonstrate such bias is to experience it firsthand." Coleman leaned back, understanding dawning. "You deliberately presented yourself this way. I focused on the legal arguments, Your Honor. How those arguments were initially received was educational. Coleman issued a preliminary injunction against Westlake's planned eviction of Riverside Gardens residents and ordered an independent review of the zoning change process. Outside the courtroom, Judge Coleman approached Olivia. "Counselor, that was an effective demonstration." "Thank you, Your Honor. I wonder how many other attorneys have stood before me with valid arguments that I've overlooked due to similar assumptions." "That's not for me to say, Judge Coleman." He nodded solemnly. "No, but it's certainly for me to consider." Gloria squeezed Olivia's hand. "You did it, Olivia. You actually did it." Olivia smiled. "This is just the beginning, Gloria. But today we made them see you. Really see you." In the weeks that followed, Judge Coleman began treating all attorneys more equitably. As for Olivia Prescott, she continued her work, sometimes in designer suits, sometimes in simple sweaters, but always with the same brilliant legal mind and unwavering dedication to justice. Her strength came from something far more significant than appearance: her knowledge, her compassion, and her unwillingness to let anyone's preconceptions stand in the way of justice.